At the end of the day, it's not about what you have or even what you've accomplished. It's about what you've done with those accomplishments. It's about who you've lifted up, who you've made better. It's about what you've given back. Denzel Washington. Welcome to Inspire Vision. Our sole purpose is to elevate the lives of others and to inspire you to do the same.
Paul Zolman, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Dr. Doug. Pleasure to be with you today.
Well, I really appreciate you being on the show. So let the audience know, where are you living at this point in time?
I'm just 2 hours north of Las Vegas, in St. George, Utah.
Okay, great. And you know, what I find really interesting is the reason why people tend to get to the point that they are from a standpoint of doing what they're doing to make a difference in people's lives. So I'd love for you to share with the audience what brought you to this point in your life where you're doing what you're doing, where you've written your book. I believe it's called Role of Love. And what brought this all about? What were the experiences and so forth that brought you to this point?
Dr. Doug, I had a habit till about 15 years ago that I was dating someone. The first marriage fell apart after 23 and a half years, fell apart. And so I was dating and got serious with someone. I'm number 10 of 11 children, so I need big brother approval. Everything I do has to have big brother, big sister approval. So I took this woman to my brother's house, actually 300 miles north of where I live in Salt Lake City. He lived there. And I took her there, and first thing that happened, I take her into the house. My sister-in-law pulls her aside and says, the only emotion that the Zolman family learned growing up was anger. At first I denied it, said, then it made me mad. And I thought, I just verified exactly what she just said. And I didn't realize that I had that problem, and my siblings had the problem, and my father had the problem. And what the problem was, Dr. Doug, is that we would stack annoyance on top of annoyance on top of annoyance on top of annoyance until we had a flash of anger. We'd go back down and we'd start stacking annoyances. For me, it wasn't much annoyance about myself. I knew everything, so to speak, because that's the dysfunctional family I grew up in. We're know-it-alls, and everybody else is lower. And we put them down to be lower as well. So we criticize, and we were stacking these annoyances and then having a flash of anger. What I didn't realize is that I had that, and I didn't realize, well, how do I get out of that? It was kind of a knee-jerk reaction, Dr. Doug, and I didn't know a way out. But at that point of time, I realized that if that's a generational habit, and it seemed like it was, if that's the habit, I don't want that habit anymore, and I don't want to pass it on to my children.
Well, and you know, that is so interesting because you bring up such an interesting point. You know, environmentally, we think we can pass it on. I think from the standpoint of genetics, the epigenetics is where we receive those types of activities in our lives and they become embedded epigenetically in our system. And then we pass that on. And so it's just a continual passing on and passing on and passing on from one generation to the other. And what a blessing it is when you can stop that. I know that in my case, I found out, you know, a while ago later after my dad's passed away that his father was, you know, pretty strong-willed and would take a belt to my dad. And I was always wondering why 6 of us, why none of the children were ever spanked. And I realized, wow, later on that he literally consciously made a decision to change that epigenetic heredity. And because of that, as far as I know, with all of my siblings, that has not been passed on. So none of us really are doing that. And so I think it's amazing that you have been able to recognize that and realize that, yes, some of these habits or whatever you want to call it can be passed through to other generations unless we consciously make a decision not to do that.
I agree, Dr. Doug. My grandfather had 19 children and my father only had 11. I only had 8. and my children are only having 3. And that's just, it looks like it's stopping. Pretty soon I won't have any grandchildren. I want more grandchildren. And again, Dr. Doug, it's out of my control. And I realized in this whole process, I realized that looking at other people and criticizing them for what they're doing was really out of my control. It's just as if I'm trying to beckon someone to love me. How's that going to turn out? I mean, it just doesn't turn out. You can't bid someone to love you in the way that you want to be loved. You can't. It's they either treat that as an expectation or they treat it as a duty. And that's what I was finding. What I do have control over is sending love out and responding when it comes back my way. But,
well, let's talk about what you experienced as a child. Let's talk about, so the audience really understands what were the things that you experienced that created that sense of anger and that response of anger when events would occur that just kind of naturally happens.
So I'm number 10 of 11, as I'd mentioned, and my father, one of the things that I love about my father is that he dated my mother every Friday night. Didn't miss. I don't know how he did it. I can't even duplicate that in my own life. I don't know how he didn't miss, but he wasn't very creative about it, Dr. Doug. It was always the Maverick Bar, and it was always over alcohol. And so as he's getting imbibed, I was never there, but I can guess that my mother started at the top of the line. And by the time he's getting annoyed, he's ready for that flash of anger at number 10. Me, I'm the target right now. That in addition to, I'm between 2 girls, an older sister and a younger sister, and he valued women. By taking my mother out every single Friday night, I knew he valued women and he valued those daughters that he had. So if I looked cross-eyed at those girls, I was in trouble. If I did anything out of the ordinary, I was in trouble because he got annoyed from all the older brothers. Those older brothers did terrible things. They were riding a motorcycle up and down the clinic parking lot in our backyard, which was a clinic parking lot. There were chains across and posts and everything. They'd hit the chain and they'd flip the motorcycle and they'd hurt themselves and they'd have medical problems. And we had more medical bills. And he'd get all annoyed at all this, but he'd take that annoyance out on me. I felt that way. I felt I was targeted in that way. And the other things that happened, like people talk over each other. Part of that angry culture is that you talk over someone else because what you have to say seems like it's more important than what they have to say. And that's part of the culture. Another part of it is all the put downs, always putting people down, always have that sarcasm. You're taking their legs out from under them. It's verbal abuse. It's physical abuse. Sometimes there was some sexual abuse in there. All those abuses were part of the household.
Oh, wow. Oh, wow. And so literally, and I get what you're saying, literally, you developed some of those subconscious beliefs that brought about anger, but I can imagine also part of that is, for me, what I experienced, and I never experienced that type of thing, but my dad was a very strong personality. And so I think as I started to do that introspective work years ago, that I realized, you know what, and I think most people have this, that I'm not good enough. And we don't realize that those limiting beliefs create our life. It creates the reality of our life, and we tend to attract those situations in given time to the point where we literally experience the fact that, hey, we're not good enough. And so for you, the anger and all of that type of thing is amazing how it literally can affect us. But what I love is the fact that you became aware of that. What was that moment, if there was a moment, where you finally had that aha moment of, oh my goodness, I've got to make a change here?
I think that the start of that, Dr. Doug, was when I'm about 35. Most people realize that they're responsible for their own stuff a whole lot earlier than that. And it took me to age 35 to realize that, oh, I got to stop blaming him for the way I act. He'd already been dead for 7 years at age 35. So I'm blaming a guy that can't even respond. He can't stand his ground. I can't even have a discussion with him to talk it out, but I'm still blaming him for what's happening in my life. And at that point in time, woke up and I thought, oh, I'm responsible for my own stuff. It was a down moment, but it also was a crystallizing moment that if I'm responsible, I'm going to make it a lot better. And so that really was a turning point for me, in addition to the turning point that I had mentioned a little bit earlier.
Well, and I love the fact that you use the word responsible, because I think so many times we see people, and we've all experienced this in our own lives, where we tend to find ourselves in that victim mode, and we blame others for what happened, or we blame God for what happened, or we blame the universe for what happened, or whatever that happens to be, or we blame karma for what happened. All of those types of things, and yet the biggest challenge, as you said, and it's not easy, is to take that personal responsibility and say, you know what? I am responsible for my life. I am responsible for my emotions, and I'm responsible for my perception of what's going on in my life and what I receive based on the fact that I put out that energy, and therefore I get equal energy back. So I love the fact that you talk about responsibility.
Absolutely, Dr. Dove. And I realized at that moment that if I can blame someone for something, I don't have to change. It's their fault. Go talk to them. And it's just that shirking of any responsibility makes you be in a spot that you don't have to change. It almost puts you in neutral gear, that you can go uphill, downhill, you can go wherever. It doesn't matter. You don't have to change a bit. The self-actualization moments that you have puts you on a spectrum. It puts you on a spectrum. And I found a walking stick a while back that just found it around in my neighborhood. Didn't have any bark on it, just like this, about 3.5 feet tall. And on one side, it's really smooth. On the other side, it's got some points and tips on it. For the listeners, I'm just trying to explain it. But what I found was that being nice was more on the loving side of the spectrum. Being angry was on the naughty side. Santa Claus, I'm sure, has a stick just like that, Dr. Doug, and that's how you get your presents at Christmas time. I knew you didn't know that, but that's how you do that. And so what I realized was that some of the things that, if I could attach an adjective to those or a description to the type of activity that I was doing at that moment, have that self-actualizing moment, I could find out where it was on the spectrum. Then I would say, well, what's the opposite of that? And then find out where that was on the spectrum. Take, for example, the word sarcasm. Naughty or nice side of the spectrum. I would put it on the naughty or the angry side of the spectrum. What would be the opposite? And what comes to mind for me is someone that's genuine, someone that's authentic, someone that's true blue. Put all those words out on the table. Most people are going to choose that they want to be authentic, they want to be true.
Yes, and they want to be able to listen. I find that was something that I really struggled with as a parent for a while, and I finally had a long conversation with my kids, and now we laugh about it. But I learned, because of my strong personality, that I always found myself making comments and, giving my opinion, which they perceived as challenging them, number one, or saying that they, were making wrong decisions or whatever that happened to be. And I learned finally that I had to literally say, all right, you want me to listen, or do you want my opinion? And oftentimes I say, Dad, I just want you to listen. I go, okay. And I wouldn't say another word. And other times I say, no, Dad, I really want your opinion here. And so then I would do that, but couch that with understanding who they were. So I think it's really fascinating. I love how you talk about the spectrum, and we can look at one area of the spectrum and go to the opposite side and recognize that, hey, you know what, if I can change from here over to here, it's just completely changed the conversation and changed the dynamics of those relationships.
Absolutely, Dr. Dove. And what I look at it as is that's the only time that you can have vision. If you're blaming someone, there is no room to change. You don't know where you are on the spectrum. Put an adjective to it. You'll find out where you're at on the spectrum. Then and only then, when you're on that stick, when you're on that spectrum, then can you make goals to be worse, or better. And that's the only time that you can make a goal, is when you have identified, where am I? Where am I on that spectrum?
So let's talk about one thing that you mentioned a little bit. But when we talk about, family traditions, and I'm not sure I like that word, but at the same time, I think it's true. If we see that tradition of anger, if we see those type of things going on, once we recognize that that's affecting our lives, how do we reverse that in our own lives? Those family traditions.
That is a great question, Dr. Doug, and I struggled with it for quite a few years, tried quite a few things to see what it was, and I realized that most of all, it appeared very similar to an addiction. If you've got an addiction, you have to have that replacement behavior. So I was looking for a long time, well, what would be a replacement behavior of being critical? I was looking at maybe 10, maybe 20% of what's wrong with that person, or 20% of their personality would be their faults and the mistakes and their misgivings, their fault, or just what was wrong with them. I was missing 80 to 90% of what was good about that person. So when I realized that and was able to dice that up, I said, oh, I'm missing all this over here. So what I created was a tool. It's just a dice that I created, that I created the icons or the pictures that have the love languages on the dice. So on the dice right now, for your listeners that are not seeing the video, there's a hand holding an hourglass. This side would represent time. Spending time would be a love language. The next one looks like a waiter holding a platter. That would represent service. Next one is like the Taylor Swift heart, putting your two hands together to form a heart. But this heart's a little different. It's got a conversation fly out. So this would be the words from the heart. Next side has a hand holding a gift. And then the last of the 5 love languages would be 2 hands touching each other. Looks like they're holding hands. 5 love languages, 6 sides on the cube. This one surprised me. So what I found, Dr. Doug, is as I created this was a tool that I don't know how I came up with it, except that I thought, well, maybe I'll make it a game. If I can learn the 5 love languages, because I read the book 4 or 5 times, I did not get it. Just didn't understand what Dr. Chapman was trying to say. I like the principles of the 5 love languages, but his application wasn't working for me. You mean, Dr. Chapman, if I guess what Dr. Doug's love language is and cater to that, we're going to be buddies? That sounds more like a manipulation, and I'm a bad guesser. It wasn't working for me up until that point in my life. Why would it continue work in the future? It just wasn't working for me. And the second thing that Dr. Chapman has in his book is that, well, if you take this survey, I'll be able to find out what my love language is. Well, Dr. Chapman, what the heck am I supposed to do with that? Advertise? Hello, Dr. Doug, I'm gifts. What do you have for me today? This is so awkward. It does not develop good relationships. So that wasn't working for me either. So the applications Dr. Chapman had didn't work. So I thought, well, I'll contact Dr. Chapman. I'll ask him if he'll license those little pictures that he had for the love languages. After a couple of weeks, his attorney wrote back and said, no, we're not doing that right now. So I had an attorney in my neighborhood that I went to. He was a copyright attorney. He said, theory, like the love language theory, is not copyrightable. Application is. So they weren't doing it as a game. I created my own icons, made it into a game. There's just 2 instructions, Dr. Doug. You roll the dice every day. Whatever it lands on, that is the love language you practice giving away all day that day, all day to everybody. And what you're watching for is for people to light up. When they light up, that's their primary or secondary love language. No longer do you have to say, excuse me, could we pause this relationship for just a moment? Well, have you take this survey so I know how to love you. That's awkward. You don't have to do awkward anymore. So this is what, Dr. Doug, this is what helped me move away from that habit of being critical to the habit of being, what's right with that person? What can I love about that person? And focusing on their positive traits, focusing on that 80 to 90% of what's good about that person. And I was so busy doing that, I forgot to be annoyed. I forgot to look at other people's faults and mistakes. And it's easier now to look for what's right about them. That's
Oh,
what
I love that concept in the game. I think that's fantastic. It's really interesting as you're talking about this, and what comes to my mind, and this is because I've really received so much information from people that I've been able to interview, including yourself. But what I find fascinating is that what you're really saying, in my mind, is here are these emotions that are there subconsciously that any event can trigger at any point in time, and yet you are consciously, with your mindset, saying, I'm going to do something different. And you are creating a different environment because you are, number one, taking the responsibility, but number two, you are purposely and consciously making a decision to do something different. And I love what you talk about with the love languages. I find that so interesting because being able to recognize ultimately what someone else's love language is, and then being able to communicate in a way that they receive that, what a difference that has to make in their lives. Not only in your life, because now you've eliminated some of that habitual anger and so forth, but what a difference it makes in their lives when they find that there's someone that is expressing, quote, that type of love to them.
Absolutely. And Dr. Doug, what I found out is that as I interact with people, and I'm interacting quite a bit through the day, but I can light up 3 to 10 people in a day. It actually does exactly what you said, Dr. Doug. It makes their day. And when I can make somebody's day, help them have a happier day, there's great satisfaction for me to be able to do that too. It really is almost that motivating, that adrenaline juice that keeps you going, to keep going with that purpose that you talk about, that purpose or that theme of the day all day long. And that's why there's pictures. There's no words on the dice. That's why it's pictures. Those pictures are memory hooks. You're been out of the country yourself, Dr. Doug, and you know that if you're going to learn a foreign language, you have to have memory hooks because the words are totally different than what you're used to. And so if you can attach a hook or a visual to that word that you're talking about, then that word's going to stay in your mind. Take, for example, the word elephant. ELEPHANT doesn't come to mind. The picture comes to mind.
Well, and so I want to stop right here and find out how does one get one of those dice, one of those love language dice? Do you actually make them available to people, or is this just kind of your own thing?
Dr. Doug, it actually started out as my own thing, and it started out like this. You can see it's a 2.5-inch block of wood, and you can see the very sharp edges on the wood. And it was kind of an epiphany when I said, oh, I'm the person with sharp edges. I'm kind of like that block of wood. And this was really kind of a weighted dice, because if I had that, whatever I wanted on top, it would go thunk, 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 and it might show up on top. Or if I knew it'd be 3 thunks, by rolling it wasn't rolling very well because of the sharp edges. I had to bevel the edges off. Now it rolled a lot better. And then it took 2 years to get the regular artwork to get the dice. So I do create the dice. I did make these dice about 1 inch square or 1 inch cubed, and I provide them for others as well. You can get it at my website, rolloflove.com. And it's a kind of a play on words, Dr. Doug. You roll, ROLL, the dice outside of you. ROLE is what changes you within. It's roleoflove.com.
Okay, I appreciate that, because I'm going to order one of those when I get back to the U.S. But here's the question that I have. One of the things that I have read a lot about, and I think that I've heard philosophically this a lot, is that in order to be able to give love, you need to be able to receive and feel love. You cannot give what you don't have personally. What are your thoughts on that? And where you experienced what you experienced in your childhood, how did you get to the point where you were receiving sufficient love that you could then share that with others? Because it's one thing to use words. It's another thing to use that emotion of love behind those words that really then affects the other person.
Dr. Doug, that's a great question. And I want to kind of couch it in the way that my parents grew up. My father graduated from 8th grade and didn't get any other education, became a truck driver. That's why he came home on weekends, and he came home on Fridays. That's when he dated my mother. And my mother had a high school education. I really put a lot of stock in education. All my children now, with the exception of just one, have college degrees. And so it took me 22 years to get a college degree. But after I did that, I felt a lot more calm. I felt a lot more understanding than any other time in my whole life. Education is key. And you need to invest in yourself to get that education, whether it's books, whether it was my book, whether it's Dr. Chapman's book, whether it's books, other books about love and about expressing yourself in appropriate ways. One of the first books I bought was maybe The Art of Conversation, or the Game of Work, and it was very old books back in the early 80s that I bought these books, but I wanted to get better in that way. I wanted to make work a game, so it didn't seem like I was working all the rest of my life. Now here it is. I made my own game, and it's loving. It can be called work, but it's really a lot of fun. You said it's that it might be difficult to give love away if you don't have that inside. I think education, like I said, was a key, but you're not going to sit in a chair in your house and expect love to come knocking on your door. But I know that you can walk in your neighborhood and there's pain under every household. Pain. If you'll find someone that is maybe just a little lower, feeling a little lower than you are that day, you can raise them up. You can uplift them, help them have a better day. And when you do that, not only is their day better, not only have you brightened their life, but you brightened your own life as well.
All right. So as you're giving love, you're receiving love, and perhaps from a higher realm that's occurring. But the reality, I love what you say. The reality is that you really, as you seek to give love to others, you receive love yourself, and that just increases and increases, which I really love. So what have you experienced now? I mean, you've literally made some changes, and I don't know how many years this is, but as you talked about how you really started to make that change and do something completely different, how has that affected your life, and how has that affected the life of those around you that are more personal friends or family or so forth?
Great question, Dr. Doug. Obviously, when you try something new, whether stopping smoking or not smoking, or you're trying to break an old habit that all your friends know about, there's always skepticism. Sometimes there's a lot of encouragement. Sometimes there's no encouragement. Sometimes they're hecklers. Whatever it is, they're watching you. They're absolutely watching you, and they'll have that fine-tooth comb out to watch for errors. Hopefully they're not of the type of person that I was, stacking those annoyances until they have the flash of anger, being annoyed at you that you're not keeping true to what you're trying to do. You'll make mistakes, and you'll just try to fix those mistakes along the way. And I think that people that are your friends are going to give you some of that latitude to be able to do that. For new people that you meet, new friends that you make, it's really, you're going to be a totally different person than what your old friends looked at and thought you were. When you get, and it's a little trepidated, when it's almost like an imposter syndrome, so to speak, that you get to the point that, well, I'm not really that loving person because I'm this person that was stacking annoyances and more critical. As a child, I thought I'd be a great movie critic, but I didn't like watching movies, but I liked being critical. And so they didn't mesh together. But it was just that thing that people are gun shy. If you were a critical person like I was, if you're a critical person, people are going to be gun shy around you. You'll repel the people. It's like that person in the swimming pool that has an accident, Dr. Doug, and then everybody scatters saying, wasn't me, wasn't me, wasn't me. There you are, isolated all by yourself. I didn't want those feelings anymore. I did not want to send people away to repel people. I wanted people to start coming to me. So that's what it looks like now, that people come to me and they know that I'll be more loving, especially new people that I've met. But my family's starting to come back. They're starting to believe that there actually has been a change. There actually has been some differences that I've made in my own life that are worth coming back and looking at.
And you say something that I find fascinating, and I think it's a common statement, but I'm not sure I agree with it. Yeah. When you talk about, you're innately angry, you're this, you're that, that's just who you were. My sense is that innately we are good. We are loving. We really are. We came to this earth as a genuinely good, loving being, person. But what happens then is between the ages of 0 and about 7 or 8, all of a sudden, all of those elements of our environment, of our parents, of our school, of our religion, of all of those types of things start to affect us. And our perception is that if those things are occurring, that is true. And therefore, we embed within ourselves a belief system that we believe is true, and therefore we say, well, innately, this is how I am, when in fact, that's not true. It's just merely things that have been embedded in your conscious and subconscious mind that is what it is. And yet, if you really get behind that and, move all of that away, all of a sudden you realize, there is a goodness innately about me. And I think it's important for people to understand that they are truly good. They're truly kind. They're truly loving. That's who they are. And it's all this other junk that has been embedded into our lives that has created who we think we are, when in fact, in reality, that's not who we are.
I agree with you, Dr. Doug. And if I said innate, that was very much the wrong word to say. It was more of a personality trait that I had at the time, when that association early with my children, early with my family, that association would have me be a more angry or stacking those annoyances and a critical type of person. But now it's different. Now what I find I'm doing is I'm stacking kindness on top of kindness on top of kindness on top of kindness. And it doesn't come to any flash of kindness, but it comes to a new realization of higher laws of love. These laws of the 5 love languages are basic literacy levels of love in my estimation, but we can use them as stair steps, Dr. Doug, to get to the higher laws of love, like charity or compassion or forgiveness or mercy or trust or intimacy. Can you imagine someone wanting intimacy and doing insult, 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 and expecting it at the end of the day or whenever, expecting intimacy? It doesn't work. Absolutely doesn't work. You've got to stack those kindnesses to get to those higher laws of love. And that's the joy and the great feelings that I've got right now, and the great happiness that I'm finding is that this is a much better life. I don't want that life of criticism anymore. I just like this life of that stacking the kindnesses. And so as I do that, more people are starting to believe that, yeah, he's trying to be as kind as possible. I know I have a long ways to go.
And I love how you're using this word or this concept. You didn't use it, of becoming. As you say, you start out with these love languages and consciously doing what you're doing with your dice and so forth. But then ultimately, it brings you to a point where you have become one of empathy. You become one of kindness. You become one of giving. All of those type of things that all of the religious leaders that we have ever experienced, whether it's Buddha, whether it's Christ, whether it's Muhammad, all of those leaders talked about that higher level of kindness, of empathy, of giving. And what you're sharing in my mind is a stepping stone way, stairs to be able to move to that point in our lives where we become that and we naturally are that. I'm curious, what motivated you to write your book, Role of Love? And what do you describe in that book, and how can that help people to better their own personal lives as they read it?
Good question, Dr. Doug. And I love that you talked about getting to the nirvana, the actual that higher level. I love the word nirvana. It's just one of those words I like. But what motivated me to write the book, I actually copyrighted the dice in 2017, and I had it, and I was testing the market and seeing if there might be other people like myself that might want to overcome that addiction to be critical or that tendency to be critical and want to be more positive in their life. And I was finding a little success here and there. One time I presented it in a couple of years ago. I presented it to a family health or a family mental health specialist, and just with him. He's in the area where I live, and he said this. He says it's a great tool, except that it doesn't come with a manual. He said you actually need. This is so different, such a different application from what Dr. Chapman had provided. Dr. Chapman's application was more a romantic type of relationship. I created this when I was single. And I said, Dr. Chapman, who in the heck am I supposed to love? I don't have that significant other that you're talking about. And I realized, oh, I get to love everybody. And it was perfect for me because I don't know anybody, Dr. Doug, that's with their significant other 24/7. I needed a consistent and a constant, almost as it were, a constant way to change that habit of being critical. This was the perfect vehicle for me. I had to create a habit of what's right about that person. What are the virtues of that person? Looking at their virtues all day long, looking at the virtues of everyone all day long. And by doing that, I was able to make the changes. But the mental health specialist said that I needed to write a book because of that big difference there is in the way that this is applied. So with his instructions or with that idea, I quickly was able to write down all the ideas that I had and put it out on a spreadsheet. And when I put it out on a spreadsheet, I had 10 different columns, thinking I'd have 10 different chapters. It ended up to have 11 chapters, but 10 different chapters. And I put everything that applied to that theme and that chapter in the columns. And it took less than 6 weeks to write the book. It took longer to edit it. It took longer to create to organize it, to format the book, and to create the cover, but published it just last year in January.
Wow. And how do folks reach your book? How do they find it?
They can also find it on my website where they'll find the dice, rolloflove.com, or the book actually is on Audible. If you've got many listeners that love listening to podcasts, love listening to books on Audible, they can find it on Audible, on Amazon. And if they go on Amazon, they want to type in my name, Paul Zolman, Zolman, and it's they don't want to type in Roll of Love. You'll get love this, love that, love a million things because of all the things about love on Amazon. But type in my name, it'll take you right to it. You'll get to there's a Kindle version of the book and the Audible version, the paper version. For those that are international, the paper version might be something that they can get, but the dice I only have on my website.
And so as you purchase the book or as you listen to the book, and I'm going to get it on Audible because I love that when I walk, I love to listen to that. Is that specific towards the dice? Is it, as you say, kind of a manual of how to use the dice and how to apply that whole concept? So people can literally read that and go, okay, I'm choosing to use this concept to improve my life and the life of those around me. Is that what it is? Is kind of a manual of how to do all of this?
It could be, Dr. Doug, and in essence, yes, would be the answer. But you don't get hung up on that. The whole concept of what I'm trying to put forth is let's make this world a little bit more loving place. There's so much violence, so much other stuff, so much other garbage going around. Why can't we change ourselves? Why can't we just be that person to go out there? And so I'm going to give your listeners a hack. You can use this as a hack for yourself too. If you're going to do the download of the Audible, this is a great hack. Just find a dice, any dice that has the numbers on it. And then on a piece of paper, write 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then list all the sides of the dice. So the last side is surprise me. On that day, you're just watching for opportunities to do random acts of kindness. So list all the, it doesn't matter what order you list them in, but put six numbers and 6 names of the sides of the dice, and then you just roll that dice. Whatever number you come up with, that's the love language you're practicing that day. So you can do a little hack. I'm telling you a hack. I'm the guy that made this, and I'm telling you the hack. So that's what you can do. You really don't even have to have the dice. Just set out to be more loving today. Start today.
Well, I enjoy that. As I've read that, and you're right, there's 5. And I've always thought, you know what, there's one more missing. And to me, what that 6th one was communication. And because I think so many people, you receive all of those other things, whether it's gifts, whether it's time, whether it's, service, whatever that happens to be, whether it's, just the physical touch of holding hands and hugging or whatever. But what I found is that for me anyway, the 6th one would be communication, and recognizing that all of this can only happen if we're willing to communicate, and the other person with whom we are seeking to develop those types of friendships and so forth will also be willing to communicate. So anyway, that was just a thought that came into my mind. So as we close today, I'd love for you to share with the audience, if you could, what would be the main message that you'd like to leave with them today?
Great question, Dr. Doug. Thank you for that. One of the things, there's a couple of things I like. One is we're talking about languages here, love languages, but there's a dialect in northern India called the Sanskrit dialect. From that Sanskrit dialect, we get that word nirvana, we get that word karma, but we also get a word called namaste. Namaste is what you hear at the end of a yoga class. The teacher puts their hands together, the thumb to the chest, and bows their head, close their eyes, and say namaste. What it means, it doesn't mean, hey, y'all, class is over, you can go now. Doesn't mean that. In the Hindu interpretation, it means the God in me sees the God in you. Or put another way, the divine in me sees the divine in you. I love that part. And I think that as we're looking at other people, we're watching for what's divine about them. In India, I've had several podcasts with podcasters like yourself, Dr. Doug, in India. And there was a 38-year-old that was the podcaster, and asked him, what is it about the people in India that makes them so loving and so kind to other people? I've just had that experience more than once. What is it about it? I said, is it Mother Teresa? Is it Gandhi? And this guy's 38 years old. That would be like asking an American, how did JFK affect your life? And he's only 38 years old. It was like way before their time. It wasn't that. He said this. He said that in India, we look at what's good about other people and what's wrong with ourselves and try to fix what's wrong with ourselves. In America, it's quite different. We look at what's wrong with other people and think that we're a lot better than them. And it's just, we've got to turn that around. We've just got to watch for the divine in other people, watch for what's right about other people, and just focus on that.
Oh, I love it. I love it. Well, Paul, thanks so much for being on the show. I think this is, wonderful. And I love how you've come up with this whole slightly different concept of something that was already existing and applied it in a way that can help people. Because again, consciously, I know that in order to change our lives, we have to consciously make an effort and do things differently. And here you've provided a tool and a game, as you say, to literally be able to consciously make those changes. And I know what will happen for those that do this, because I've experienced this, is you get to the point where you start to really feel that sense of peace, that sense of love. And guess what? As you get to that point in time, you're going to find that you feel healthier, that you have better relationships, that overall life is so much better. So for your contribution to that, thank you so much. I think that's wonderful.
Thank you, Dr. Doug. And it really has been a pleasure to be with you today. I look forward to listening to our podcast as well as many of others that you've done.
Well, thank you. And folks, thanks for listening. Hope you really enjoyed this. And go to rolloflove.com and take a look at those things, because I think that you'll find that for many who are seeking to do this but haven't figured out how, here's a methodology that allows you to actually do it. So have a great week. Love that you listened to us and hope you'll join us again soon. This is Dr. Doug saying namaste.